Good afternoon, Canisius High School community. It's Andy Deyell, your Vice President for Institutional Advancement, back with another episode of Conversations with Canisius. I am joined today all the way from New York City by Jonathan Holland from the class of 1995. Jonathan is the Vice President for Digital Partnerships at MasterCard. And Jonathan, welcome and thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Andy. This is exciting. Let's get into it.
Let's get into it. So tell me, the first question is, what does a vice president for digital partnerships do? What does that mean? And, I've had the benefit of talking to you once or twice, and I have a pretty good understanding, and it's a pretty big job. So tell us a little bit about what that job is entails.
Many things. Jack of all trades, master of none. But
Right.
To keep it simple, partnerships at any major global organization really looks after, client relationships. And so from a digital partnership perspective, I look after large digital players. So if you think of like your Amazon, so specifically for my purpose, I look after Amazon, I look after Samsung and partners like that. It's a global remit, which keeps me up day and night. And I've got little kids, so I get very little sleep. But digital partnerships really kind of looks after the end-to-end relationship and make sure that we're at the disposal and the behest of those companies. So Amazon works with us. And you think of acceptance points, and MasterCard is good at acceptance points all throughout the globe, but we've got many technologies at our disposal, and anything that we have in our toolbox is at the disposal of Amazon, and Amazon uses all of it, right? So,
Sure.
We've got a lot of things from not only our core capabilities, but we've got services, we've got other overlay services that we put on top of these payment technologies, and we really kind of like, help power the future of the economy. So we'll get into that a little bit, and I've weaved that into some of our story today.
Absolutely, absolutely. I was going to say we'll get to sort of your journey as far as how you got to MasterCard, but let's go back in time a little bit to 1991. You're a youngster growing up in the Western New York area. Tell us a little bit about where you grew up, how you heard of Canisius High School, and sort of what were some of the decision points on you ending up there.
Yeah, I grew up in Amherst, more specifically East Amherst area. I went to St. Gregory the Great, which was over there on Maple.
Mhm.
And, it was one of those communities, ride the bike, walking type situations. And we've had a lot of good high schools around the area. I think there was Williamsville North, Williamsville South, Williamsville East. I was kind of in the middle of all three of those. And, a lot of my peers and folks that were in the neighborhood were going to those schools, and my parents having me go to St. Greg's were like, no, we're going to be touring a few high schools in the area. And it turns out a lot of the folks that I was going to school with were going to St. Joe's, and I thought that I was going to St. Joe's. Like that was the thing. And they were like, well, we're going to check out a school called Canisius. And I knew a little bit about it at the time, but as soon as I went and did that first, open hall, if you will, it was like, it was a done deal.
Really?
I mean, I think it was just such a great campus, such a great feel. When you visit multiple campuses and you kind of look at some of the other high schools in the area, that one really kind of fit the bill. And even if I look at it like retroactively, I would do it 1,000 times again, right? I mean, it was just such a great experience, and we'll get into that experience that I had. But, I think my parents were like, look, you're going to Canisius, like that's full stop. That's where you're going. Ultimately, it was my decision. And, after meeting some of the faculty and, some of the prospective students that we had, it was just, the rest is history.
And when you think back into those 4 years, at 1180 Delaware, who were some of your some big influences from like a faculty and staff standpoint? And then secondly, what were some of the activities you participated in as you were going through?
I love the question. And I really reflected on this one. And, if you think of like any of the questions that you threw at me, this one really took me down memory lane.
Mhm.
So I've got a list. I'm not going to go through every single person that I interacted with, but I've got and it's in no particular order. So I don't want somebody to say, well, you put me in front of whatever. So,
Sure.
First, Father Nauman.
Sure.
Father Nauman was just such a force. I mean, he taught me discipline. He was such a scholar.
Mhm.
And I was just, as I was prepping for this, I remember some of the songs and some of the poems that we used to go over, and I remember them.
Sure. So do I.
Honestly, like, I'm going up on almost 30 years having graduated, right? And if
Right.
if you do the math, like 32 years later, I'm still remembering some of these things. Like he really instilled for me to be the best. And I think that that's really what I gravitated from him. And he was really specific. Like he was just a proper man. And
Yeah.
he expected young men to be in his classroom. And I really appreciated that from him. You know, Father Zanoni, I have to say Father Zanoni. I mean, it's on everybody's list, right?
Sure.
He really looked after me in Canisius, and he was tough, but he was fair.
Mhm.
And I remember he was a big baseball fan.
Mhm.
And we used to talk baseball, and that was just a fond memory that I had. He really didn't let me get away with much. Somebody that you know very well is Father Encimino. How can I not put him on the list? He was my principal when I was there. He cracked the whip.
Sure.
He was just, he looked after me in terms of he wanted me to succeed. And I'm not going to lie, he gave me unlimited jug a few times. But I think that really kind of was like, look, when you're out of bounds and you're not doing your best, we need to correct that. And I had I remember some drug incidents where, yeah, I mean, I wasn't showing up to be my best. And he was like, you know, we're going to have to look after you. But also, you know, as I've grown through my career, he's seen me from up close and afar. You know,
Sure.
he spent a lot of time in New York, and I've been grateful to be able to spend a lot of time with him. And he's seen me throughout this journey, and I've used him as a sounding board on many occasions. And he continues to be there for me. So now, you know, he's not in New York anymore. He's back in Buffalo. We're sad to see him, but he's always continued to be a resource for me. Last but not least, Father Keenan.
Oh, sure.
Father Keenan was very close with not only myself, but my parents. My parents were very active in the community, especially in the high school. And so not only from a kinship from me, but he was also a really close friend of the family. And he was almost like that grandfatherly figure back then for me. And I would go and see him in his office, and he was the president at that time. And my parents served as the president couple in my senior year.
Oh, wow.
So, you know, they shared a lot of experiences, and he's been at the house and all of that. So, you know, not to put, you know, any particular order, those are the ones that have had the driving force for me. As far as extracurriculars, you know, I was a lacrosse man. I dabbled in volleyball, although I wasn't that tall. I tried my best. And I dabbled in speech and debate as well. You know, I had to do my best and be a linguist to the best of my ability. I thought I was going to go to law school at some point. I ended up doing way better in business, and got my MBA, but we'll get there in a moment. So that's the
great.
rundown.
And those 4 years, and we both know, go by very quickly. And the four gentlemen you mentioned as far as influences, four of my favorites as well. You and I are right around sort of the same cohort, had all of them as either teachers or administrators. And Father Keenan, you know, has married several of my friends, just an all-time great guy. So those 4 years go by real quick. You know, where did you end up going for undergrad? And then tell us a little bit about your career and get us, you know, fast forward up to 2023 and your sort of time at MasterCard.
I'll do my best.
Yeah, right. It's a lot.
It's a lot of years.
Sure.
Ended up going to UB, stayed local. Loved UB. My father was very, you know, was affiliated with UB. He went there for dental school, and, you know, we kind of have a little bit of a kinship there. Ended up graduating with distinction. I went on to Canisius College for my MBA. Did the accelerated program there. Met a lot of great professors. Dr. Palumbo is really still a good friend of mine. He sends out a monthly and quarterly update to Western New York, and I make sure that I get that. I'm on the distribution. He just sent it out on Friday. I make sure I read that as a part of my my discipline. But UB and Canisius, and then what was interesting was one of the site heads for City was on the board of Canisius College. And one of my teachers said, hey, I've got this student excellent in accounting. You should take a look at him. I interviewed with this gentleman. He was from London. He ended up in New York City, and they appointed him the site head of City in Buffalo. So I'm talking Cross Point over there in Amherst. Interviewed with him, and he said, hey, we're bringing a lot of jobs from New York City to Buffalo, and we're bringing this, you know, balance sheet, you know, reporting job. Would you be interested? And I said, Yeah, I'll think about it. It wasn't the most exciting at the time, like, oh, I'm going to be managing a balance sheet. But,
Mhm.
I took it back to one of my teachers and he said, you're nuts. These jobs that they're moving from New York are big jobs. You don't understand the scope of the remit of what they're trying to set up. And it was actually like the lowest paying job that was on the list of things I was looking at. I took the job. He said, you're going to see the world with this job. And I didn't really believe what he meant when he said that. I started working at Crosspoint. I was doing probably 12, 16-hour days. And I got the ear and the eye of a few people here in New York. And this is pre-financial crisis. I was sitting on the balance sheet, not only reporting on it, but I was sitting on all the positions for all of the capital markets activity. And as you know, throughout the crisis, one of the things that they were after was liquidity. Citi, amongst a few other firms, were looking for and sourcing liquidity almost at a real-time basis. And I generated a series of reports that got the ear of the CFO, and he moved me to New York City.
Wow.
And said, look, we're going to give you a team. We want to understand all liquidity, and you're going to be running this team, and blah, blah, blah.
Wow.
Running this team, pretty big remit. And I was reporting on and sourcing the liquidity throughout the crisis. AIG came calling and they said, hey, we want you to stand up a similar team here at AIG. So if you think of the two main firms that really needed assistance during the financial crisis, Citigroup and AIG, I sat at corporate center in both positions and helped build these corporate centers for them.
Wow.
And so that's kind of how I got my claim to fame here in New York. And long story short, I made my way back to Citi. I knew a few, seniors I was close with, and they said, hey, look, come back. We want you to help in this business called TTS, which was Treasury and Change Solutions, which is really kind of like the deposit and payment business for Citi, for all of their institutional clients.
Okay.
So I was running some of the liquidity businesses and some of the payment businesses there because I understood, although I did know the back of the house and mechanics of how a balance sheet works and how liquidity flows and all of that made sense. I didn't have any client-facing experience. I wasn't day-to-day with a customer. I was really kind of managing like the corporate center of these firms.
Mm-hmm.
So I started to take some positions overseeing client relationships, and I became quite good at it, right? I had the business acumen. I knew how the financial markets worked. Then you layer on how customers work and how customers think and how customers will use your products. That's when I started to round up my career. So I ended up at Citi for a number of years doing that. And a senior that left Citi and went to MasterCard to run a B2B business called me up and said, look, I've got this role. You should take a look at it. And the rest is history. I've been at MasterCard here since 2018. I've had 4 jobs in the 4 years that I've been here, almost 5, which is quite remarkable. If you think about a career, usually you stay in a role for 2 to 4 to 5 years, and I've seemed to have moved around. I think you can make a joke out of that. Maybe each manager didn't want me to stick around. But really, it was a testament.
So, Jonathan, just sorry to interrupt, but there are some companies that move people around in an effort to get them more well-rounded, right? Like when you see capacity.
That's exactly the case.
Okay, all right, that's what.
Yeah, that's exactly the case. So, I don't mean to tout, this is a very rare occurrence. I didn't really, if you think of my journey, and I shortcut a few things in there, I didn't apply for any one of those jobs. Somebody called me.
Right.
It was somebody in the network that said, hey, I've got this role. Who can I call on? They called me. Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying that I didn't have competition. I didn't have to interview for a role or whatever. That's always the case, but I've always been called upon, and especially internally this company, and any company really sophisticated these days really likes to move people around. And that just kind of speaks to, and I'm building on this relationship aspect that we have here.
Right. Right. And so, and I would imagine as you go back just a little bit before we spring forward again, but when you're as young as you are and you're moving to New York, and I would imagine it could be overwhelming to like be put in charge of large teams, or how did you know you could do it? Or was there any doubt along the way? And what from your sort of Canisius education did you fall back on during those times of, stress and challenge?
Doubts for sure. You never fully go into a new role thinking you've got it all, right?
Sure.
You may have 30%, you may have 40%. You've got to figure the rest of it out, right? The 60 or 70%, whatever it is. Canisius really preps you to find it within yourself to push through those hard times of adversity, right?
Yes.
For you to believe in yourself. You've got the brain up there that will help you get through these times. And Canisius really kind of put that discipline. It wasn't necessarily the core learning of the book of the day-to-day. It was kind of getting through it all that helped me prep to get through these experiences, right? I mean, if you think about it, I had to move here. I didn't have necessarily infrastructure in New York. I had infrastructure in Buffalo. It's not like I had all of the contacts, but New York has a huge Canisius alumni that I see on a fairly regular basis, and they have an annual event here. And it's amazing how many Canisius alumni are here in New York and throughout the globe, right? I mean, it's not like I'm just doing business in New York. I'm traveling. These are global roles. So I'm not only here. I'm in Asia. I'm in Europe, and I'm meeting people just like yourself all over the place. So yes, it was hard. I moved here, but I also had infrastructure that was going to help me along the way. And a lot of those, aforementioned gentlemen that I just mentioned, a lot of my teachers were those mentors, were those guiding posts to say, look, you've got this, and people will have your back. You just have to kind of believe in yourself to kind of push forward.
Well, yeah. And so as you think about, your younger self, and if you could give any advice to your younger self, or thinking about, ideally our alum will watch this, our young alums, our students, as they're trying to figure out who they want to become and what they want to become, one of the ideas of this series is to give our young alums an idea of what you can be. What are the things you can do, and how do you get to accomplish them? What advice would you give to our young alums and our students here at Canisius?
Could I rewind just a little bit?
Of course, yeah, for
to
sure.
the previous question, and then I'll address your next question.
Yes.
I have three more points. I just want to extrapolate a little bit.
Sure.
If you think Jesuits live a life of service, and I do my best to serve others every day, it's not just about what I'm doing for my community, it's what I'm doing for my products and what I'm trying to build, right?
Right.
I volunteer incessantly in my community. So it's my way of giving back and supporting, but also those people in that community have supported me. So if you think of in terms of, and we had these times of stressors in your life, you rely on people that you didn't really think you would rely on in the future. I'll take an example. When we had Superstorm Sandy here, I was out of my place for almost 35 days. I used the infrastructure and the network that I built here to kind of sit on couches, to borrow cars, to get to offices that were not even in my home area, because, where I was living in Battery Park, it was devastated through Sandy, right? I didn't have access to my apartment, didn't have access to my office. So I kind of had to use a backbone series of infrastructure to kind of get that done. Canisius also instilled in me this set of responsibility and ethics. How do I conduct business in that manner, and not only be successful, but build these products that are responsible in the community, right?
Right.
And then I think the last thing is just Canisius was just that North Star for me. I think that just kind of speaks to what I was saying before. And that compass was built and kind of framed out in Canisius, but it was honed along the way. And it's almost as if 30 years later, it's automatic.
Wow.
And so you were asking me, what are the 2 to 3 things that students and maybe alumni need to really kind of think about? I've reflected on this a great deal. And, I've been able to kind of have these types of talks to students in the past. And I think it really is around these 3. There's really no linear path to all of this. There is no straight line. It ebbs and flows. Sure. And so you're going to have things in your career that are just setbacks. You're going to have things, market forces, family dynamics that are just going to be setbacks to you. If you think about the Ukraine war, it's easy sometimes to think it's over there, right?
Right.
Well, guess what? We do business all around the globe. We have infrastructure in Russia. We had to shut that infrastructure off because the administration asked us to because of sanctions or whatever, right?
Right.
We also have employees in that region that we actually had to make sure that we ensured the safety of. So we had to make sure that we shut off a business delicately and were able to get employees out of a place, their choice, to make sure that they were safe, right? In fear of like this retribution. So, we had to really pivot and think about how we optimize the business, how we, maintain revenue, et cetera, et cetera. Lead by example. So as we are Canisius alumni and we come from that a discipline, and I'm representing the men that came before me. If you think of Father Nauman, Zanoni, Father C, look, I would never be able to walk this earth and do what I do and not necessarily be representative of them. And if you think I never want to let a Father C down, let alone my own parents or my own infrastructure, my community here. So I lead by example, and really I'm speaking to future leaders as well. It's when you think about crafting a career, you don't have to be so complex as to, well, I'm going to be doing this in 5 years. It's just really just do some of your founding principles and your guiding principles that you're getting from Canisius. That will end up seeing you through. And the last thing I think is really easy to miss is always stay close and stay there for your family. I think as people are working in some of the disciplines that I work in, I can't believe, again, I've said this 3 times, it's been 30 years since I've graduated Canisius, but it really goes that fast.
Sure.
And if you're head down and you just mentioned to me the time flies, the time flies with your family as well. And if you don't take the time to be there, if my family calls right now, I'm going to hang up this Zoom and answer the phone call. And it really kind of I want to be a good father. I want to be a good husband. I want to be a good son. And then at the end of the day, that's what we're doing all of this for.
Absolutely. Well, what about your future? As you think about your future, you're a young guy, you're not quite 50, but you're accomplished. What goals do you have left to accomplish? And what are some of the things you want to do in both the near term and more of the longer term?
Yeah, I think I'm going to continue doing this for the foreseeable. I love building, the next gen technologies for companies. If you think of some of the things that MasterCard's built throughout the years, and a lot of the big infrastructure players. So a counterpart like me works on Apple, for example. And if you think of the Apple card that we constructed with Goldman Sachs, that's a very forward thinking version of a new form of payment that wasn't there before. If you think of the technology where you're able to tap your phone at a terminal and pay versus pulling out a piece of paper or a piece of plastic or writing down a check, those evolution points will continue to exist. And how do I help fold that, and how do I help, manage that for the future, I think is really kind of the near term. And I think, how do I pay it forward for the next generation, right? How do I become a beacon and a teacher for that next generation to learn from? It's one thing to, be behind a textbook and to be able to drive value for students that way, but I also want to be a resource for students in that capacity as well. So however that looks when I near retirement, I'll let you know. And I think that probably also dovetails into probably, some corporate governanceships or corporate boards or something like that, right? Where I'm happy, I'm going to help steer and navigate, companies going forward.
Well, Jonathan, we really appreciate your spending some time with us today. You've given us a lot of good information, a lot of good reflection points. Please, next time you're in Buffalo, stop by and see us here at Canisius. And we look forward to seeing you the next time we're in the New York City area, which, as you know, is a fairly regular occurrence. So thank you for sharing your wisdom today, and take care of yourself.
Thank you. Great.
See you soon.